On the night of April 22, 1978, Bob Marley stood at the center of the National Stadium in Kingston and raised the hands of Jamaica's two most powerful political rivals above his head. 32,000 people screamed. The image went around the world. What the world did not know, what most of it still does not know, is that the man who made that night possible was not standing on the stage. He was somewhere in that crowd, watching. His name was Aston Thomson. Kingston knew him as Bucky Marshall, and within 2 years of that night, both he and the man he had made peace with were dead. The official explanations were thin, the timing was exact, and nobody in power ever had to answer for it. There is a detail buried in the accounts of the peace that preceded the concert. When Bucky Marshall and Claudie Massop formalized their truce at the corner of Oxford and Beeston Streets on January 9, 1978, witnesses later recalled that neither man arrived with political handlers. No party official stood with them. No government representative co-signed what they built. Two men, enemies, alone at a boundary line. The parties that had armed them were nowhere to be seen. At the moment the guns went quiet. That absence, quiet, complete, and never explained, is where this story lives. To understand who Bucky Marshall was, you have to understand what West Kingston was. Not the postcard version, not the reggae mythology, the actual physical and political reality of the streets where he grew up. Matthews Lane runs through the lower western edge of Kingston like a crease in old cloth, narrow, dense, pressed between yards where families lived, 3 and 4 to a room, where the smell of cook fire and zinc roof heat mixed with whatever breeze came off Kingston Harbor. The community had absorbed wave after wave of displacement, rural Jamaicans who came to the capital looking for work, families cleared from the Bacco Wall settlement when bulldozers arrived in 1965 to make way for the JLP's flagship garrison project, Tivoli Gardens. Those displaced people were resettled, sorted politically, and left to build lives in whatever space remained. Matthews Lane became PNP territory, the way a wound becomes scar tissue, not by choice, but by the pressure of forces that did not ask permission. The garrison system that shaped Bucky Marshall's world was not a government failure. It was a government project. Beginning in the early 1960s, both major Jamaican political parties, the Jamaica Labour Party and the People's National Party, began constructing electoral fortresses out of Kingston's poorest communities. Housing developments were built for politically selected residents. Boundaries were drawn and enforced. Young men who proved capable of enforcing those boundaries became the men the parties needed most. They were armed, protected, and deployed. In exchange, they delivered votes, maintained territorial control, and absorbed whatever violence the political cycle required. The parties called it loyalty. The communities called it survival. The historians who have studied it most carefully call it what it was, a system designed to weaponize poverty. By the late 1960s, Bucky Marshall had become the dominant force in Matthews Lane. He commanded what became known as the Spangler's Posse, operating out of 69 Matthews Lane, a location so inseparable from the group's identity that it became simply known as Group 69. Across the boundary, in Tivoli Gardens, Claudie Massop held the equivalent position for the JLP. Both men were products of the same machinery. Both men understood, at some level, that the war between them served interests that were not their own. Now picture the corner of Oxford and Beeston Streets on a January morning in 1978. The air is still carrying the residue of the 1976 election, a campaign so violent, the government declared a state of emergency. The boundary between Matthews Lane and Tivoli Gardens is not a metaphor. It is a physical line that people have died crossing, and two men are standing at it, face to face, without guns drawn, without handlers, without political cover. They are choosing something the system did not ask them to choose. They are choosing to stop. The 1976 election had pushed garrison violence to a threshold that even the parties found difficult to manage publicly. The documented murder rate spiked. Entire streets changed political identity. through forced displacement. Communities that had once been mixed were cleansed. The state of emergency gave the security forces broad powers, and still the killing continued through Election Day and beyond. It was in the aftermath of that violence both men likely jailed in the same facility during the state of emergency period, according to multiple historical accounts, that Bucky Marshall and Claudie Massop began their conversation. The exact timeline of their imprisonment and how long they shared space is not preserved in any primary document the public record currently holds. What is confirmed across multiple sources is the outcome. They agreed the war had to end. The peace spread faster than anyone had predicted. Word moved through West Kingston the way weather moves. Not announced, just felt. Peace dances were organized. Communities that had been locked down behind political lines began to breathe. The Dons had spoken. The border was open. Massop flew to London to find Bob Marley. Marley had been in self-imposed exile since December of 1976, when gunmen had entered his home at 56 Hope Road, just days before the Smile Jamaica concert, and shot him, his wife Rita, and his manager Don Taylor. He had left Jamaica immediately after performing wounded at that concert and had not returned. Massop tracked him down in London and made his case directly. Come home, play a concert, put the piece on a stage where Jamaica and the world could witness it. Marley agreed. The One Love Peace concert was scheduled for April 22, 1978. 16 artists were confirmed. The proceeds were designated for sanitary facilities and housing improvements in the garrison communities of West Kingston, the same communities that had been bearing the physical cost of the political war. The symbolism was exact and deliberate. The money would go back to the people the system had been using as ammunition. The night itself opened at 5 in the afternoon, with a message from Aston, the Crown Prince of Ethiopia, read to the crowd, an invocation that placed the event within the Rastafari spiritual framework that threaded through West Kingston's cultural life. The crowd is 32,000 strong. The stadium is full before sunset. Peter Tosh takes the stage and does not celebrate. For 66 minutes he confronts. He addresses the politicians seated in the front section, Michael Manley and Edward Sega, both present, and demands the legalization of marijuana with a directness that makes the air in the stadium shift. He is not performing. He is accusing. The crowd absorbs it. The politicians sit still. Then Bob Marley walks out. What happens during jamming is filmed, documented, and has been written about in every serious account of Jamaican cultural history. Marley stops mid-song. He speaks to the crowd about love, about Selassie, about what this night means. Then he calls Manley and Sega to the stage. Both men come. Manley takes their hands, the hands of the two men whose rivalry had built the garrisons, whose parties had armed the Dons, whose electoral machinery had turned West Kingston into a war zone, and lifts them together over his head. The crowd erupts. 32,000 witnesses. The image circles the globe, and somewhere in that stadium, Bucky Marshall watches the moment that his peace treaty produced. He would be dead in less than 2 years. Claudie Massop died first, on February 4th, 1979, less than 10 months after the concert. Massop was shot at a police roadblock following a car chase that began after he left a football match in Spanish Town involving the Tivoli Gardens Football Club. He was shot at least 40 times. 2 other men in the vehicle, Lloyd Fraser and Alphonson Trevor Tinson, were also killed. Massop was 31 years old. The police classified the encounter as a legitimate security operation. No inquest finding entered the public record with enough force to contest that classification. No political figure was ever questioned about it publicly. The man who had organized the One Love Peace concert, who had flown to London to bring Bob Marley home, who had stood at a boundary line and chosen peace over war, was buried without ceremony or accountability. Here is what the record does not explain: why both architects of the peace were dead within 2 years of building it, while the political system they had briefly constrained continued without interruption. That question, the one planted quietly in the absence of political handlers at the Oxford Beeston signing, does not have a documented answer. What it has is a pattern. After Massop's death, the peace eroded, the boundary lines rehardened, the garrisons rearmed. Bucky Marshall, reading what was happening, left Jamaica for New York City. The specifics of his time there, where he lived, what he did, who he moved with, are not fully preserved in any source the three-source confirmation standard can certify. What is confirmed is the endpoint. On March 8, 1980, Aston Bucky Marshall Thomson was shot and killed at the Starlight Ballroom in East Flatbush, Brooklyn. He was gone. The police attributed his death to gang violence. No prosecution followed in the documented public record. No political figure commented. The man who had co-signed the most significant peace treaty in modern Jamaican political history died in a Brooklyn ballroom, and the official record closed quietly around it. The 1980 general election, the one held 7 months after Bucky Marshall's murder, produced 889 reported murders in Jamaica. It remains the bloodiest election in the island's documented history. Edward Sega and the JLP won. The garrisons that Massop and Marshall had briefly quieted delivered their votes at gunpoint as they always had. The system had not changed. It had simply replaced two men who tried to slow it with men who would not. Tivoli Gardens passed eventually to Lester Lloyd Coke, Jim Brown, who expanded the garrison model into the cocaine trade that remade Caribbean crime in the 1980s. Matthews Lane continued under successive dons, who extended the garrison system's reach into extortion and narcotics. The political parties continued to rely on garrison communities for electoral muscle. The architecture that Bucky Marshall and Claudie Massop had been built by, and briefly challenged, outlasted them both by decades. The peer-reviewed scholarship on garrison politics in Jamaica, including work published in academic journals examining guns and gang communities across the Caribbean, identifies this period as a structural turning point. The conclusion that runs through the serious historical literature is not comforting. The garrison system was not a corruption of Jamaican democracy. It was a feature of it. The parties needed the dons more than the dons needed the peace. And when the peace threatened to reduce the parties' leverage, the system found a way to absorb the threat. Whether that absorption was orchestrated or simply inevitable is the question the archive has never answered with evidence. What the archive establishes is a sequence. 2 men built a peace. Both men died within 2 years. No one was held accountable, and the violence that followed surpassed everything that came before it. That sequence sits in the historical record, whether it is called coincidence or design. The One Love Peace concert endures in Caribbean cultural memory as one of the great symbolic moments in the region's history. The raised hands, the music, the 32,000 witnesses. That memory is real, and it belongs to the people who were there. But the full story of that night cannot be told without naming the men who built it, tracking what happened to them, and asking what it means that the system they briefly interrupted closed back over them without a sound. Bucky Marshall was not a saint. The garrison system he commanded was violent, coercive, and harmful to the community it claimed to protect. The historical record on that point is not ambiguous, but he was also a man who sat in a jail cell across from his enemy and chose to stop a war that powerful people needed to continue. He organized a night that 32,000 Jamaicans will never forget, and then the system that made him finished with him. So here is the question the history leaves you with, and there is no clean answer, so do not look for one. Was the peace that Bucky Marshall and Claudie Massop built a genuine threat to Jamaican garrison politics, or were they allowed to have their moment precisely because the system knew it could survive them?